Ladies and gentlemen, we are a nation of optimists. We've always been. And that's one reason why we always turn to our scientific community when we see a big problem. When Thomas Jefferson doubled the size of our country and bought the Louisiana Purchase, he suddenly inherited a big chunk of land, and there was a question, could we keep it? And what did he do? He turned to Lewis and Clark to explore the land and really, truly make us ours, not just on paper, but in fact. Similarly, when our nation has run into trouble in the past many times, perhaps most recently in World War II, once again our nation turned to its scientific community to solve its big challenges and problems. Today, once again, we face actually several big problems. Energy comes to mind, a coming huge problem with proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And we are going to have to turn to the scientific community to address this problem. I'm going to deal with the second issue, the weapons of mass destruction, as an example for how we will use science to solve problems. You know how applied research traditionally works. Some granting agency that gives grants comes out telling you what your results are going to be. You look at what you're doing anyway and figure out how you can convince that agency that what you're doing will actually give them what they said they want. That doesn't really work when we've got a pressing problem and we need an answer yesterday. So we're going to work with a different paradigm. The question is, how can, in this case, the diplomats work with the scientists as partners in order to design solutions? What I'm talking about here is how to catch a cheater on a treaty that is supposed to make us safer. Why do we enter treaties anyway? We enter treaties because we think that the treaty will make us safer. And if somebody puts their pen to paper and signs a treaty and then they cheat, that treaty has not made us any safer. So it's absolutely critical that we can verify that treaty and that we have mechanisms built into that treaty that really work, that guarantee that that treaty will be as verifiable as possible. Now, your typical cheater is going to be pretty sophisticated. And if we do anything predictable or conventional, then they'll pretty much know how to fool us, because advantage goes to them. They're going to be doing it in their country. We're not familiar. It's their home turf. They will beat us, and they will cheat, and we will be less safe. On the other hand, if we can surprise them, if the scientific community can come up with an idea that they haven't thought of, come straight from the lab bench into the field, we can catch them before they figured out a way to cheat. And that's what we're looking to do. Now, what can the diplomats do to help this process? Well, unfortunately, there's not usually, as you scientists know, there's not usually a silver bullet. Usually, there's a solution that either works from far away, that is designed to work from far away but doesn't tell you much, or it tells you a lot, but you've got to be close in. So the question is, how do you square that circle? And the answer is that at the end of the day, the diplomats and the scientists are going to have to work together to come up with that combination of scientific gizmo and access agreement that works together the best to get the most information. Okay? Now that means something very different. That means that the government representative, the diplomats, have to be talking to the scientists and find out, hey, what's realistic? What's possible? How close do I need to get in order to have something that's going to work? And the scientists need to talk to the diplomats and say, okay, well, what is a realistic scenario? Is the gizmo I'm designing ever really going to be useful, or is it pie in the sky that might be nice in situations that will never happen? But if we can get that synergy, if we can get the science and the diplomats to work together to where we get access and forensics together to basically create treaty verification CSI, something along those lines. I assume you're all familiar with the CSI series. That would move our nation a great big step closer to being secure. And this is the paradigm I'm proposing, and we're looking to you to join us in the diplomatic community in order to achieve that paradigm. And the Bureau I come from, verification, compliance, and implementation, really operates at the nexus of science and diplomacy. And we would like to be the facilitators of this dialogue. Thank you. Q&A. Oh, yes. Any questions? Yes, there are, we run an office. If you have a nifty idea, we are in contact with the big federal agencies that fund large research. So if your nifty idea involves a large chunk of money, we will connect you with the folks over at the Department of Energy. There's an office there, the program managers there. Some ideas are funded out of some of the other agencies, typically Office of Naval Research or BS&T at the CIA. Those agencies may fund some of the more interesting ideas. We have a very small pot of money of our own. If there's no other customer and it doesn't take a lot to address an issue directly related to treaty verification, we may fund it ourselves. So coming to us is certainly not a bad idea. If you have a pre-existing relationship with a program office, kicking new ideas around with your program manager and coordinating with them is, of course, always appreciated by that program manager. And in fact, we may be able to work something out where some of your pre-existing funding can be leveraged in order to achieve great things, perhaps by adding a small amount of money from our bureau. For everybody's benefit.
Yeah, if you're looking at new technology to drive verification regimes, how important is it to get these new regimes accepted by your treaty partners, or you only looking at national needs?
Oh, we're actually very specifically looking at going beyond national means. I mean, obviously, whatever you can do by national means, you want to do, because we can get operational security with national means that you can't get in any cooperative arrangement. But sometimes you can't get close enough with national means, and that's where you need some kind of a cooperative arrangement. And that varies. I mean, we're hoping in some cases to be able to come in with equipment where we don't tell the folks involved what it is we're carrying. It's a black box. Well, that's the beauty of treaty verification. It is so universally accepted as a legitimate activity that it's respectable to be a spook. You know, everybody knows what you're doing. It's okay. It's understood. It's basically almost like police work rather than like traditional trying to get somebody's secrets. So that in this case, and for this one problem, there are things we can do, intelligence-wise, that you really couldn't do in order to sort of gain some kind of an advantage by knowing about leadership intentions, things like that. So it's really a different kind of problem. And that's really the thing, is you really do have to take advantage of the fact that treaty verification is special in that way. And that, in that case, sort of the line between spying, diplomacy, overt, covert, and so on is not as harsh as it is in other types of
Then how are you going to make sure that as we look for nifty ideas again, we don't get back into the cycle where we get in the requirements of being driven by technology, or how are you supposed to keep requirements driving technology versus technology driving requirements? How are you making it?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. The DoD runs into that a lot. That is a real problem that is solved, I think, best by good management. Because the natural tendency is for, whether it's a technology company or a scientist, to sell what comes easy to them. And similarly for a program manager, it's easier to sell what is a small change on what you've been doing and repackage it. That's a much easier job than to truly address a customer need and start from scratch to build it. What makes this situation different is, in an analogy to a problem from World War II 60 years ago, we were losing the Battle of the Atlantic. And at that point, that way of doing business, it would have become pretty obvious pretty quickly. We would have continued losing the Battle of the Atlantic. It's only when people really changed the way they approached a problem and they really went back to basics and they talked to the end user, and the end user talked back to the scientist, the researcher in development, and created a real dialogue as opposed to business as usual, that they came up with a series of different solutions, none of which worked that well alone. I mean, whether it was sonar or small aircraft carriers or operations research, which was designed to make them all work in concert, or they broke the code, signal intercepts and so on. None of those alone made a difference. But by putting it all together and working it all with everybody thinking, what is the problem and how do we solve it? They, within 2 years, turned that battle around and won it. It was one of the crucial turning points of at least our end of World War II. And I think at the end, when you have these hard problems where if you're not addressing them, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly, that is the best insurance policy you have, that business as usual, where people are just selling their familiar solutions and the buyers are just buying the old familiar stuff, where that nasty cycle can't continue. More questions? I guess then, again, I want to remind everybody what I've been talking about, which is that there are times when we can do science as usual, which is we let the scientists play in their sandbox and we let the government program managers pay them to do that, and everybody writes a nice narrative and goes home, and we do get some good basic science done, but it's not really going to be a golden age of applied science. We don't really have that luxury today. We have these pressing problems. And I looked at one. I looked at the proliferation problem and said that we have to be results-oriented. And that means partnership. And in this case, a strong partnership between diplomacy and the scientists. And we need to build on that. We need to have our communities talk together.